So, how did I turn into this strange species, this platypus of the performing arts world, known as a science rapper? And what does a science rapper do? Well, I perform a lot of rap shows around the world at theaters and conferences and college campuses, and most of the themes of what I performed lately has been science. A lot of it's on evolution, but some of it's on other subjects in science. A few years ago, I was a songwriter in residence at the National Institute for Mathematical and Biological Synthesis, and they had me writing songs about computational biology. So just to give you a feel of what some of the rap songs that I didn't write in the last couple hours sound like, I thought I'd do a little demo.
It's talking dirty to me. It's talking dirty to me.
Is it just me, or is it incredibly sexy when someone expresses intellect effortlessly? I met Leslie at a party. She's a postdoc. She rejects any explanation that's post hoc. All I could think was, she's so nice, as she told me about her work on alder phenotypes with CO2 levels experimentally elevated. I felt elated, like, what an incredible lady. But then I got all forward and said I wanted more of it, and she called my enthusiasm a false correlate, and I felt all subordinate, so I stepped away. And later I met Dave, Leslie's ex-sex slave. He explained how embarrassing. He told me spiders engage in arrow parenting, and a homologous molecule to oxytocin predicts it. But then he split to go babysit Leslie's kids.
It's talking dirty to me.
I don't get it. Is it a personal preference or a universal fetish to get thrills from 7-syllable words in a sentence? It's presented unpretentiously, carelessly. I get titillated interdisciplinarily. You can find me chilling at a research institute, conducting interviews in an impish mood. I met Sue at a conference. She's into modeling genetic trees and species phylogenies. She swept me off my feet. I got wrapped up in bed. She recited a long list of taxa until I cracked up and said, it's sadistic to put so much emphasis on statistics. It's twisted, but she was arrogant. She said, tell it to the genes that you share with chimps and not with me. And she drifted off to sleep. I guess nerdy talking isn't all sexy. Shit.
So I was writing rap songs about trying to hook up with a scientist before I met Heather, which was prophetic. But I wasn't always a science rapper. Actually, in the past 10 years, I've put out more than 12 rap albums on various subjects, some literary, some just straight up hip hop, some science. The middle one is the Rap Guide to Business. And the first one I put out was in 2004. When I go back to listen to my older work, I find that it isn't actually very skeptical. So here's the first rap song I ever recorded in 2004 on my record, Swordplay. And I'll just invite you to tune into the lyrics and give it a listen.
This. Whether it's done consciously or unconsciously, whether you walk nonchalantly or run confidently, whether you live under palm trees or march to the drum's beat, complicity comes back to haunt your sleep, and pride and obstinacy like monsters creep inside these songs of freedom. The soul longs to speak. You gotta sow if you want to reap. Still, karma runs deep. Sometimes you can't see the cause of cosmic grief.
Can we identify the pseudoscience in these lines? So what is this stuff about the soul longs to speak? So that's why we do our rap songs, because there's a soul and it has the desire to express itself. And if things are going bad around you, that's because karma runs deep and the cosmos is capable of experiencing something equivalent to grief, which causes people to have difficult times in their lives. These were beliefs that I grew up with. These were what my friends that when I was growing up believed, pretty much what my parents believed. And I didn't really question those beliefs, although I did consider myself someone that was open to science and agreed with science. I didn't see any way in which science was contradicting those beliefs because I just hadn't looked very closely at that. But then a few years later, in 2009, I put out my first science rap record, which was the Rap Guide to Evolution, and I was still talking about karma at that point, and this idea of karma, of like, the things that you're doing in your life will come back to you. The cosmos is keeping track. You will be punished for your actions, even if it's not by other people, if it's supernaturally. And I hadn't really thought of it at the time, but the dark side of karma, which is, of course, blaming the victim, and if everything good that happens to you, you deserve, then also everything bad that happens to you, deserve, and the moral consequences of that can be a little problematic. So by the time I got to writing science rap, I was taking a different approach to karma. So I'll play you another clip from another record of mine. This is from the Rap Guide to Evolution.
You don't have to reciprocate either, because karma is a sophisticated teacher, and karma isn't just like energy waves in the ether. Nah, karma's in the way that everyone hates a cheater. Cheater detection will keep you in check when you jump cues and refuse to treat people respectfully. So go ahead, take what you want, run me down, because I believe what goes around comes around.
So I'm still trying to talk about karma in my rap songs, but now I'm trying to redeem karma as a concept that proceeds from the biological function of reciprocal altruism and cheater detection. And if we keep track of each other and punish the people around us that are behaving in ways that undermine our social groups, then people could naturally leap to the conclusion that it's the universe doing the punishing. They could erroneously instill the agency in inanimate objects and the cosmos when actually the agency is coming from each other, right? So then this was my way of thinking, okay, maybe all this belief in karma is not entirely baseless, it's just sort of misapplied to certain contexts. And where does it come from in me? Well, I think partially it probably comes from the upbringing, as I said, that surrounded me as I was a young person. So here's my parents. I'm from Vancouver, Canada, so I was raised by some serious hippies back in the day. And even my name has a bit of a pseudoscientific or a spiritualist connotation. Baba is an honorific from India, from Sufi traditions and from Hindu traditions, and it means an enlightened mystic or a guru or a spiritual teacher. So those were the Babas, and apparently when I was born I had a contemplative expression like a Buddha, and as a baby I resembled a Buddha. So to my dad this was empirical evidence that I must be reincarnated from an enlightened saint of the past. Therefore the name Baba was awarded to me, an honorific before I even came close to deserving it. And the more skeptical I get, of course, the more ironic my name becomes. But when you grow up with something, then you just sort of like feel like it's you. And the other place that reinforced my ideas about karma and sort of supernatural punishment and reinforcement and rewards was rap music. So every idea that you can have about spirituality and metaphysics, you will find rappers to corroborate those ideas. So here's KRS-One. Give a listen to his take.
So I say, listen, open up your third eye vision. God is not down with religion. Religion, they be selling it. Listen up, God is intelligent. Reading up the Bible is irrelevant. You gotta look within yourself, not a scripture. KRS-One comes to rearrange the God picture. If you sit and believe, you can't achieve.
I actually wrote a paper in my religious studies class about that song, and KRS-One really was sort of representing my views at the time, and this was when I was first starting out as a rapper as well, that religion has sort of bastardized the spiritual force that religion originally would have come from, and there's all these different versions of it, but really there is some kind of supernatural being that maybe, or maybe not being, but energy force or whatever. I was like, the more vaguely I described the thing that I believed in, the more plausible it seemed, basically, but that's where my view of karma and sort of supernatural workings in the world, that's how I would have described it before. I became scientific, and here's how I became scientific. This book was in the works, The Rap Guide to Evolution, and it's by a guy called Mark Palin, who's a bacterial geneticist in the UK, and he was looking at Darwin's influence on the modern world, and he wrote a chapter about pop culture interpretations of Darwin, in which he referenced some popular songs and some movies, and he referenced this rap song here. He writes, lit hop artist Baba Brinkman sees links between natural selection, medieval poetic jousting, and hip-hop's freestyle competition. Brinkman directly engages with evolution, common descent, Dawkinsian memetics, and a highly intelligent rap entitled Natural Selection while taking a dig at the ID movement. Now, when he had written this, I hadn't put this song out yet, but I had written it to perform at one of his events similar to this, at a conference type thing. And so he wrote to me and he said, I've written in my book that you've done this highly intelligent rap song about natural selection. You better put it out before the book is published so you don't make me look bad. So then I started working on producing the song and did put it out, and it became the first song in this project of mine called The Rap Guide to Evolution. And when I was developing The Rap Guide to Evolution, there were certain constraints involved, because Mark was going to have me perform my evolution-themed raps at a symposium, at a conference that was going to be all scientists, and he made it clear that there were a lot of misconceptions about evolution and how it works out there, and I was not to communicate any of the misconceptions. I was to keep it scientific, otherwise I wouldn't be invited to the conference. So he required me to send my lyrics to him in advance so he could fact-check them, which allows me then afterwards to stand on stage and say, I'm the first rapper that's peer-reviewed. And my lyrics are, have the imprimatur. But this was a difficult process because previously I had written rap for my peers, and my peers believed in things like karma, so I sort of somewhat uncritically decided to give them what they wanted or whatever. But this time I was supposed to write for these scientists, so then how could I talk to scientists about an unscientific concept? Well, maybe I can try to give it a scientific framework like the reciprocal altruism concept, and I did that for a lot of things, but I did really try to keep it we're not going to claim anything in this show that overreaches the evidence. And then I went and listened to a lot of rap rap songs to see maybe there's some other rappers who had already done this. Is there a scientifically themed or valid version of rap that's out there already? So I found one song called Evolution by a group called The Far Side. I just want to give you a little sample of The Far Side's take on evolution. Check it out.
Connected and we checked and it's correct that the soul extends far beyond this fleshy existence. The rest is still trapped in ignorance, giving resistance from a distance, interference from far away. But neither Tim nor Anthony had a harder way on getting here. I'm spitting clear, connecting with the energies from near and far away. Karma come back like a ricochet to hit ya. So I'm coming with a scripture for the fixture. Get the picture. Yep.
Get the picture? No, not exactly, actually. But they were basically reinforcing the view that I had grown up, which was that evolution was a scientific process, but it was also a process that could describe sort of personal achievement of greater perspectives, or spiritual evolution, or evolution of consciousness, or whatever. That's what they seem to be describing here. Energies from near and far away, karma comes back like ricochet, the soul extends beyond this fleshy existence. But I couldn't put any of this kind of stuff in the Rap Guide to Evolution. That had already been made clear to me. So I couldn't really look to rap for help, except for stylistically at that point. But I could look to Darwin, The Origin of Species. So here is the phrase from The Origin of Species, or the sentence rather, that really inspired the project the most. Whoever is led to believe that species are mutable will do good service by conscientiously expressing his conviction. For only thus will the load of prejudice by which this subject is overwhelmed be removed. If you are led to believe that evolution is true, then it's a public service to speak out about it, not to just keep it to yourself, because evolution is one of the concepts from science that accrues the greatest amount of misunderstanding and prejudice, and that's how it's going to be overwhelmed, and that's how it's going to be removed eventually. 150 years later, we're not exactly there yet, but maybe that's because not enough people aren't taking Darwin's advice, are taking Darwin's advice rather. So I got from this both my marching orders, and also this idea about being led to believe that species are mutable. That's the main challenge of science communication. How do you lead someone to believe that species are mutable? And the answer is the scientific method, the evidence. That's how you get led to believe it. And that's how I was able to understand it through the research that led to the Rap Guide to Evolution as a project. So I read a whole stack of books that were referred to me by Mark Palin, and the vision of evolution and how it worked expanded. I always knew I was into evolution because my peers were into evolution, and I had taken biology courses, and so of course it was right. I'm not a creationist, right, obviously, but I didn't really know what it applied to or how it explained any aspects of human behavior, or the degree to which we could be placed amongst other species in terms of ethology, behavioral patterns, and things like that. So over the reading period, these are just a few of the ones that I sort of read and put strands of into the show. And little by little, my opposite of skepticism, my credulity towards the spiritual explanations for anything in human experience and existence, which it would have included karma, but other things as well, they started to fall. These were the barriers that started to fall as I was reading about this stuff. And the final barriers for me were art and morality. And partially this was because I was raised in an area where people were described morality mostly in spiritual terms, but also the art thing was a personal experience one. Like when you're performing on stage, you get a buzz, you get a thrill, and how could the passion that went into art be caused by biological factors? Or how could the inspiration that went to the creative moment of putting together a piece of work that's then received by many people with a great deal of enthusiasm, when you're writing it doesn't feel like it came from you. It feels like it came from somewhere else, and a lot of rappers describe that as sort of channeling the spirits or whatever, and that was my experience of it as well when I first started writing rap. So a lot of my early rap was sort of like spirits are speaking through me themed type of stuff. But then that stuff started falling apart because I was reading about the behavioral explanations for the origins of faith belief and artistic ability in some of these books. So basically what I did is I went from the perspective of Alfred Russel Wallace to this perspective of Charles Darwin. Russel Wallace was the co-discoverer of the theory of evolution, but he never accepted that it could explain the higher human abilities that aren't found in exact analogies in the natural world, specifically art and morality and the sort of feeling of transcendence. And one of his arguments was if pre-literate societies have people that are capable of learning to read and learning science, but none of their ancestors ever did, then how would you to explain via natural selection where they got those faculties, because natural selection is a conservative process, and it would seem wasteful for someone to have the mental ability to learn to read without ever having had to have an ancestor who had learned to read. So for Alfred Russel Wallace, evolution could explain everything up until human evolution, and then we must be divinely endowed with certain faculties, including art and morality. That was, I didn't know it at the time, but I was a sort of Wallacean evolutionist, and I became a Darwinian one, and Darwin, of course, believed that everything that people do has biological precursors and analogs in the natural world, and we accumulated all of our mental powers and faculties, including art and morality, from the process of natural selection over a great deal of time. So then, as I was working on this project, unexpectedly to me, my belief in other things that I'd grown up with and not really thought about started to fall, and I was like, well, if the scientific method is telling us that creationism is not true and evolution is, well, then it also happens to be telling us things about how homeopathy is not true, and how there's no evidence for alien abductions, and there's no evidence for a reincarnation and for the existence of a soul. And so I started to write very skeptical rap music, because these were like things that I had never really critically appraised, or had sort of left a certain degree of openness to maybe it could be true. My religious studies professor used to make the distinction between a warm agnostic and a cold agnostic. And he would say that a cold agnostic is someone who says, I don't believe, but I don't really care whether it's true or not. And a warm agnostic is someone who says, well, I don't believe, but I really hope it's true. And so I described myself as a warm agnostic for a long time. You know, I could never claim something without rational basis, but I left a lot of, oh, you know, we don't really know. Could be true, you know, evidence might come through that all this stuff is true. So this was a real sort of psychological transition from me from one state into the other. So I've claimed that all of your spiritual and metaphysical beliefs, you'll find rappers to express them. But what if you're a non-believer? What if you're an atheist? I mean, there's certainly a lot of Christian rap out there. The guy in the upper left there, Lecrae, won a Grammy recently for explicitly Christian rap. And when I say Christian rappers, I don't mean rappers who happen to be Christian. I mean rappers who speak about what it means to them to be Christian and why they're Christian in their lyrics. So there's lots of those. There's also lots of Muslim rappers who talk about what it means to them to be Muslim and how it inspires their life or whatever. But are there atheist rappers? Yes, there are some atheist rappers, but they don't seem to be a unified force in the same kind of way that the Christian rappers and the Muslim rappers seem to be, that sort of speaking with one voice or whatever. Maybe part of that is about the label, because atheist is a sort of negative term. It's you know, I don't believe in that, but you're lots of other things. You're a leprechaunist as well, so we're going to organize around that too. So maybe there should be skeptical rappers instead, but the problem with skeptical is, especially in the arts, it's sort of associated with cynical. Like your job on stage is to prove the skeptics wrong, so why would you want to self-identify as a skeptic? It was never something that I personally identified with growing up, but sort of when I learned the science and rationalism version of the word, I started to claim it, but everyone's not happy with it. Rationalist is good, but then you're sort of suggesting that everyone who doesn't self-identify as a rationalist is irrational, and then it's sort of pejorative, so some people don't feel comfortable with that. Science rap, well, lots of creationists say, well, science confirms my creationist views, so I'm down with science too. That may be too big of a tent because of the sort of misunderstandings of what science means. And naturalist, I actually like the best. I will describe myself now as a philosophical naturalist. I do consider myself all those other things as well, but philosophical naturalist seems like the most basic because so many other things flow from it. It's someone who believes there's no supernatural causes. But the problem is that when you say naturalist, people associate it with things like natural foods, natural remedies, or like naturists nude on the beach. And then you have to explain what it means to everybody one by one. So there isn't really a solution. And there's also a Google problem, because when you type in atheist rap, you get nothing but these guys. It's a Serbian punk band. So it makes it difficult for us to create an online community that sort of is easily searchable. But of course, there are some atheist rappers. There is Great and Square, there is Sickness and Grip, and a whole crew that sort of unifies around, they call themselves, or we call ourselves, Grand Unified, because I'm a member as well. But there hasn't been a great deal of fame achieved by GU rappers just yet. Which is possibly the future of where it's going to go. I include Tyler, the Creator, in here because apparently some interviews recently suggest that he's also an atheist, although the way he expresses it is by ironic Satan worship lyrics. So, don't think we really have philosophical common ground here. So what I'm looking for from atheist rap personally is the degree to which the non-belief informs the meaning and lived experience of the artist's lives. And there's rappers that are starting to do that and sort of making good art out of it instead of just sort of pedantic art or teaching art, but it's not a fully formed movement yet, but it is also sort of like, it's a fairly new phenomenon, is another factor. But I think there might be something else going on here. And I want to bring you back to these Far Side lyrics. And just this thing they say right here, I'm spitting clear, I'm connecting with the energies from near and far away. This is a sort of a suggestion that the spitting clear, the rapping, what they're doing on stage, and the fact that they're doing a good job of it requires these energies to come to them. And this is from their perspective, a sort of lived experience. And crowds do this. I can attest to this as well. When you're on stage and you're rocking a crowd and they're with you and they're cheering, it feels like energy. And rappers talk about this as if the crowd had great energy. It's a very short leap from there to believing there's actually a metaphysical, supernatural force called energy that's probably the same stuff in auras, and it sort of flows between people or whatever. I think a lot of rappers naturally believe this because of what it's like to A, create things and have them sort of pop into your mind seemingly from nowhere, and B, do a live interaction with the crowd on stage and feel like you're not going to do well unless the energy is right in the room, or unless you've got your chi up or whatever. So there may be something about being a performer that makes skepticism difficult. It may be the case that you got to come to the art in the first place with skepticism, but once you're an artist, if you start to achieve a certain level of success, then you're going to be married to the experiential explanations for where that success came from, which seem to be naturally more supernatural than naturalistic, at least in my experience and from talking to a lot of artists. And it may help us explain this phenomenon.
I just want to say thank you so much, not only to God, but to Jesus. Because, I wouldn't be here without him. He's really blessed me. He's put me in this position, so I want to say thank you so much. Also, I want to say thank you to all the other...
So, everyone in this room is instantly aware that Justin Bieber is committing the logical post hoc fallacy. He believes in Jesus and he gets famous, therefore he believes that he got famous because he believed in Jesus, and Jesus gave him that reward. But I think it's most likely that it's the other way around, is that getting famous probably made his belief in Jesus stronger. Because what are the odds that would happen to him? That him, of all people. And of course, this is similar to the anthropic principle. What are the odds that we would end up in the one universe that's got all of the perfectly finely tuned constants? Like, that's got to be divine providence, right? But it's only from the perspective of having already gotten there and looking back that you're able to make that appraisal. So I think a lot of artists who get famous are naturally prone to attribute that to supernatural forces, and as was I at certain points, although I wasn't very famous when I sort of started making the transition towards skepticism, so I escaped this trap somehow, because my trajectory was not nearly as high or as fast as Justin Bieber's. But I have achieved things that have been to the mind of someone who was just starting out and unable to do a show or make $1 off of it pretty amazing. I've gotten to perform for crowds of 3,500 people. That's the Hammersmith Apollo in London. And a couple years ago, I got to open for Stephen Hawking at the Seattle Science Festival. And I got to actually perform the rap, and Stephen Hawking was on the side of the stage watching me perform. And so there's these moments where you're like, how did I get here? What are the odds that this would actually happen, considering how little I started with when it came to opportunities and abilities in this craft, and who put me here? But then, of course, I don't think anything put me here other than the endowments that I had, potentially, genetically, environmentally, a lot of luck. And basically, I just think it all has natural causes. So that's why I can self-identify as a science rapper at the end of the day. And I hope that this concept is something that spreads, but that all is going to depend on the evolutionary forces at work in the audiences that the rappers perform for. Because, of course, the performing arts are an analogy for natural selection, and it's only the audiences that choose or select which artists end up getting big and which ones don't. So the onus is on you from now on. But for the moment, I'm just going to give you a little sample of the Rap Guide to Evolution and how I try to weave a lot of these ideas together. So this is a piece called Darwin's Acid. It was 1859 when Darwin spilled the first splashes of his universal acid. And the effects were like magic, burning human arrogance into ashes. In pretty much the same way that Copernican math. No, the stars don't shine just to improve the view from Earth.
No, we are not the center of the universe. No, we were not created in the image of Jupiter. No, we're not so special. And yet, the truth hurts. But that's how evolution works. Once it's been applied, that acid burns into the superstitious side of the human mind, and it fills it with life. It even dissolves the original sin of pride. That pride that says, I'm a special creation, and my creator has given me dominion over nature, and he has the power to replenish his creatures. So if species go extinct, well, he can recreate them later. And if he doesn't, well, that's just part of his plan. But Darwin's acid is hard to withstand. It plucks the arrogance deep from within the hearts of man, and it teaches us never to build our houses on sand, but instead to try to understand why we're here. We are just one species among millions in this biosphere, and we have millions of ancestors behind us, and it was their fighting spirits that combined to give us all this great survival gear. These minds, these limbs, these incredible tools, they were perfected by millennia of constant competitive use, and yes, these attention-seeking genitals too. Without them, these living forms could never improve. It's such an elegant view. It's so full of breadth and grandeur. And yet some people react with depression and anger, like it's so unsympathetic. It's so viciously random. What's the point of compassion or ethical standards if this is all just a game that these mindless organisms are trapped in and they're just genetically adapting to environmental factors? Then doesn't that mean there's no responsibility for individual actions? It's nihilistic. Where's the governing dynamic? Well, once again, Darwin does give us some answers. He says yes, everything from violets to violence to viruses, it is all just organisms adapting to environments. If you're alive, it's because your ancestors were the best survivalists. They were the finalists in the genetic Olympic Games. Every one of your ancestors made it to reproductive age, and they were all better than their competitors at getting laid. Otherwise, you just wouldn't be sitting here today. Now some say, ooh, that's cynical, but I see something inspirational in this vision of Darwin's, and it goes like this. Organisms, like us, are not isolated. We are also part of the environmental mix, so your decisions affect evolution. It isn't directionless. Now, before you dismiss me as a mad environmentalist, just try to imagine how natural selection applies to countries that have industrialized. I mean, just like organisms, companies live and companies die, and when customers buy based on a company's ethics or its green plan, well, that affects the economy. Just ask Alan Greenspan. See, cultural evolution is ours to reinvent. Wait, can we affect current events? Yes, we can. And when we choose who to sleep with and reproduce, our sexual choices, they recreate the gene pool. So it's simple. Maybe all we need to do if we want things to improve is refuse to sleep with any mean people. Now, I'm speaking especially to women. When I say that on you, the pressure may be a little greater because men might just do whatever it takes to get into your favor. If that's just in our nature, then if selfish behavior was a sexual gravedigger, the effects would be major. See, in each of these cases, it's our intentional efforts that can play the part of those environmental pressures. I can say, this is a space where peaceful existence will never be threatened by needless aggression. I can say, this is an ecosystem where people listen, where justice increases over egotism. I can say, this is a space where religions achieve coexistence and racism decreases with each coalition. See, this is my vision of Darwinism, and how we all factor in. Each of us is a part of the environment. We each pass through it, and then we change it, and that affects how other people are going to adapt to it. And then after, we get to look back and see how we impacted it, maybe have a laugh, if our sense of humor is still alive. What did Charles Darwin do? Well, Darwin threw some light on the origins of humankind, and he left us with skewed pride, but he also taught us that yes, there is grandeur in this view of life. There is grandeur in this view of life. And the fact that it also happens to be true is nice, but I can't say it as well as Mr. Charles Darwin. So come on, let's hear your version from the origin.
There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, From so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved.
So that's the thing. I want you to go out and speak unequivocally. If you're led to believe it, you will do good service by saying it in public as loudly as possible, but also as gracefully as possible. Thank you guys very much.